Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your patience as we are getting started. My name is Shirley Levy. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Chief of Staff at the Department of Cultural Affairs. Thank you for joining us today for COVID safety de-escalation training for creative industries and businesses. A few housekeeping items before we begin. One, closed captioning is provided via Zoom. If you'd like to turn it on, locate the icon marked CC at the bottom of your screen to select subtitle or chat captioning. Two, the main chat function on today's Zoom will be disabled for audience use, though panelists may use it to share helpful links and other information. If you would like to ask a question, and we very much encourage you to do so, please use the Q&A feature, which you can also find a link to at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, we do want to advise you that today's program is being live streamed to Facebook and is also being recorded. A link to the recording will be circulated later today. With that, I want to thank you again for joining us, and I will turn the floor over to Commissioner Lori Cumbo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Cumbo. I am the new commissioner for the Department of Cultural Affairs. I'm happy to welcome you all today for this really important seminar, and thank you so much for giving us your time. I'm happy to be here. This is a challenging time as we work to bring back New York. And we know that the arts are so critical to the city's economy and our recovery. And you all are doing a phenomenal job each and every day at bringing back New York and making it stronger than ever before. Everywhere across the country, mask and vaccine mandates are being suspended or eliminated. In New York City, as you know, the key to New York City mandates were suspended in early March. While organizations are encouraged to implement their own safety policies, we've heard from many of you, a lot of you have been speaking to us, that these individualized policies without the city mandate has been challenging at times, and that engagement with audiences, staff, and patrons is requiring a heightened level of mindfulness and preparation. And so we know that you all are doing really tough work and you have your own issues that you're dealing with, but it's so important that we figure out ways, and this panel is going to help us do that today. You spoke, we listened. So with our critical partnership in mind, we've put together today's presentation. I'm joined by my colleagues from the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, their Office of Nightlife, and the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings to offer you a presentation and discussion about de-escalation in some of these real-time situations. I want to specifically thank our staff, Shirley Levy and Helene Blyberg at Cultural Affairs, Carla Hoke Miller, Jose Sogard, and Francesca Mira at MOM, and our friends and colleagues at Oath for their work to make this possible. I want to remind everyone that the presentation today is not going to focus on specific policies, but rather about de-escalation tactics that could be applied in a range of settings to enforce the policies that you choose for yourselves. The work you're doing is so important to bringing New Yorkers together, giving our city that vibrancy and energy like nowhere else. And we know it's not easy. So thank you. Thank you again. I look forward to the discussion and will now turn the floor to Carla from MOM. And again, thank you everybody that put this presentation together. We are going to bring back a more resilient, more equitable and safe New York City. And you are on the job doing it each and every day. So we thank you all. Please continue to do that great work, and we're going to show you or give you the tools so that you can do it even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cumbo. I'm Carla Hoke Miller, the Director of Theater Programs and Partnerships at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. And I want to thank a special thank you to Jose and Francesca for their technical, from the Office of Nightlife, for their technical assistance today. And again, the agenda today is not about policy review. It's a presentation from our colleagues at the Center of Creative Conflict Resolution at Oath, the city's Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, and leaving ample time for a Q&A to address questions based on specific scenarios. To supplement the presentation, in the link we've provided a downloadable, in the chat we've provided a downloadable link to signage, and you can display it in the front or back of your house or venue as you see fit. And then hopefully that will provide some assurance to to your team when engaging in sticky situations, that the city supports you. Thank you all for being here, and I turn the floor over to Hallie and Justo from the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution.
Thank you, Carla. And good afternoon, everyone. We hope you are doing well. Thank you for having us present on our practical and mindful de-escalation tips for public engagement webinar. My name is Justo Sanchez. I'm the Director of Services at the Center. I'm co-presenting with my colleague, Hallie Analik, Director of Training and Education. And by way of introduction, the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution at Oath is New York City government's central resource for alternative dispute resolution and restorative practices. And at the center, we offer a range of services to support city government and its agencies in preventing and managing conflict in positive ways. As already been mentioned, we have been invited by the Department of Cultural Affairs and the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment to present a conflict resolution webinar today. We presented a similar webinar to support the New York City vax mandate in 2021, and that webinar was put together to share conflict resolution tools that may be helpful to businesses when engaging with patrons around the mandate. In today's webinar, we'll be covering much of the same material while acknowledging that the city's mandate has changed and cultural institutions have discretion to adopt their own policies around COVID safety. That being said, we want to make sure that we acknowledge that you've already been out there doing the work and making the changes necessary to continue running your events in a safe and lawful way. In doing so, we imagine that change and conflict have been an inevitable part of the process. And for some of you, the expertise in your roles has served you well in working with difficult situations involving members of the public. We hope today to provide just additional ways to supplement what you have already been doing successfully. The webinar is organized into 4 segments, SPED. We encourage you to think of that acronym. And what we'll be doing first is exploring what internal resilience you already have and can build upon to respond to conflict consciously rather than to reacting in the moment. We'll then move on to actions we can take to prevent conflict from escalating. And in the event that an interaction does escalate, we'll look at options to rely on in the moment to de-escalate and move through the situation in a good way. Lastly, we want to highlight that your safety is the #1 priority and the common thread throughout all of the segments. So if you ever feel unsafe in any situation, do not hesitate to remove yourself from that situation and seek out assistance as needed. Moments of conflict can be challenging. The experience of conflict is mired with a range of negative thoughts and feelings. For example, anger, uncertainty, fear, sometimes physical discomfort. And while all of this might sound obvious, when we reflect on it, in the moment it happens quickly and unconsciously. In our experience, self-awareness is the key here. It's having the ability to bring awareness to the present, focusing on ourselves and seeing how our actions, our thoughts or emotions do or don't align with our internal values. If you were to reflect on your own lived experience, you'll recognize that as uncomfortable as it is, conflict is a recurring normal part of life. It's something that I need to remind myself from moment to moment. So while we know that conflict will happen, and while we might not always show up in our best way all the time, we do have the capacity to broaden our perspectives and shift our energies in order to hold ourselves well. This is something that you've done before and you can do it again. So the first step we can all do when in conflict is to engage self-awareness. It's the ability to recognize in the moment that the situation has an impact on you. We're encouraging you not to ignore that. Acting from a place of low or no self-awareness could result in a spiral of emotion-driven interpretations of our circumstances. That's what we're trying not to do in the moment. It's the ability to recognize that the situation is having an impact on us, where we can lead to proactive responses. We need to capture that moment if we can. And in this way, you keep most of your attention focused on resolving the situation in front of you. This is a simple tip. It can help one shift from a potential negative reaction to a more mindful and calm response. So getting in touch with and becoming intentionally aware of the physical reactions in our bodies, as I've mentioned, is important. And it's what helps us to not become overwhelmed by them. When you recognize that emotion, that trigger, here's some things you can do. And the first is simply to take a pause, recognize the body signs, and guide your focus to the best of your ability to your breath. You want to intentionally slow it down in order to create the space to not react. So conscious breath taking helps to regulate the internal system. We're trying to find a place of calm, especially during moments of stress. If it's helpful, focus on the breaths that you're taking in and out. So I'm going to ask you right now, wherever you're at, if you wish, you may close your eyes, but I'm going to ask you to take 3 deep, intentional breaths. And as you're taking them in, focus on the sounds around you. Taking it in, focus on your body posture. One more deep breath. Focus on your thoughts, on your sounds, on your tones. So we're doing this simply to minimize reacting from a place of fight or flight in the moment, centering ourselves. We want to focus as best we can on the one thing we have most control over, and it's ourselves, meaning our thinking and our actions. Some other things that you can do: opening and closing your fingers, standing tall, stretching your spine, noticing your posture. Conflict can be experienced with physical stress, which causes our muscles to contract. It restricts airflow and blood flow. And if the experience you find is too uncomfortable for you, it's okay to excuse yourself and step away. Take a break after a difficult encounter. Splash some cold water in your face. Connect with a colleague or friend. Anything that might help you recenter is what we're going for here. These are all simple actions that you can take that will barely be noticed by others. And it does the work of relaxing the internal stretch reactions that come up when we're presented with conflict. Once we notice that, we can center ourselves. Now we're in a better place to engage from a place of calm, from a place of self-control. So that we're avoiding reacting from a place of stress and uncertainty. First step, self-awareness. I'll now pass it to you, Hallie.
Thanks, Justo. So Justo shared the importance of starting with ourselves. And so we can also talk about prevention. How do you approach and communicate with other people in ways that reduce the negative impacts of conflict? And so the best way to prevent escalation of conflict is not only to prepare yourself, like Justo was talking about, but also prepare your environment. And so this may include posting clear signage on your premises, like Carla mentioned earlier, updating your website with clear and simple language about your policy. It may include having private spaces in your building, if it's possible, to have difficult conversations, either with customers or when conflict happens among staff members that's outside of the larger public setting. It could also be having a clear plan for escalating events with your staff to support them, like having a manager or a person on staff that they know they can contact with questions. So we also want to take a simple, clear, positive toned approach when you're aiming to de-escalate a conversation. It's one that uses positive body language, eye contact, maintains respectful distances, and keeps in mind our tone. One that communicates a sense of warmth and friendliness. And proactively building rapport with others is another way to prevent conflict. It's much easier to work through difficult conversations with people that we have a good rapport with. So if it's people working with the public, It might mean introducing yourself, asking for their first names, creating a connection before sharing policy information in a clear manner. If it's those that you have ongoing relationships with, like thinking about staff, thinking about vendors that you work with, it's checking in with them before conflicts arise to see how they're adapting to the policy and to hear what challenges are arising for them. We also want to be mindful of the context where these conversations are happening. When conflict is occurring in busy and public spaces, we want to know where there's visible signage around us. We want to know who are the people that we can look to for support, and always remembering, like Justo said, to take a breath before interactions. With change naturally comes stress, and being prepared for difficult conversations goes a long way to managing and responding well. Recognizing signs of escalation in others is another way to prevent a situation from getting out of hand. So on the slide, there's common signs of escalation like muscle tension, people clenching their fists or tightening their jaw, a sudden change in body language, pacing or fidgeting. There's the rooster stance, where people's chest is protruding out or their arms are coming away from their body. And then these disruptive behaviors like yelling or bullying, refusing to comply with the rules at your institution. So we want to be mindful of the signs in others, but also with ourselves, be mindful of our own signs, because they'll show up in your body before registering in your brain. And we have an impact on others. So like if I'm displaying escalating signs in my body, then the other person that I'm talking to might mirror me. However, when I display positive signs unconsciously, maybe the other person will follow me. And this is where we go back with beginning with the self-check, doing what you can do to relax your system, and not forgetting that you can always walk away or ask for help if the situation feels overwhelming or like it could get out of hand. And if you notice, most of the signs of escalation are nonverbal. And nonverbal communication is usually more impactful than any of the words that we choose. And in fact, words only really make up 7% of the impact our message has on others. Our tone, the rate at which we speak, our body language, eye contact, how close or far away we are from someone is much more significant. So it's not what you say, but it's really how you say it. And nonverbal cues really strengthen a first impression, and impressions are formed within the first 4 seconds of contact. So you can keep this in mind when working with the public at the door and entrances to your institution. And also remember that wearing masks hinder some of our nonverbal cues. You might not be able to see someone's full facial expression. Your own might not be fully seen as well. And New York is one of the most diverse cities in the world. We all know this, and your cultural institutions host international visitors on a daily basis. So especially in New York, it's helpful to remember that communication is culturally relative, meaning based on our cultural shapings and preferences, how people communicate will vary a great deal. So in some cultures, people will use hand gestures like me, speak in animated and expressive tones, while others might communicate the same things less expressively or in quieter ways. Or eye contact, among some, is seen as a sign of respect, but among other cultural groups, it might seem aggressive or uninvited. And challenges around communication are not limited to cultural differences. There may be language and disability factors to consider. What's most important is to not assume that our way of speaking is shared by all. So the tip here is really to be aware of differences, be mindful of the many ways of communicating, and be patient and be sensitive to the many ways people will show up that you work with. So the first step is to check your internal reactions and do what you can to prevent conflict by making intentional choices ahead of time. And then here are some tools for what you can do in the moment when conflict comes up. One is to listen to understand. It's one of the most important tips of engagement, and often the one we tend to gloss over. When someone's expressing them strongly, they want to be heard and understood. So we can let people know explicitly that we understand them, let them hear it. It goes a long way in bringing down the temperature of the conversation. And counterintuitively, one of the best ways to de-escalate a tense moment is to engage with the speaker's own experience. So listening to understand means focusing on what the experience of the speaker is, and then letting them know that you understood what they said by reflecting their experience back to them. In this early stage, you can stay away from debating, offering solutions, sharing your own perspective. Instead, use your own words and way of speaking to let them know that you get their perspective. So, for example, after sharing your policy around vaccination and masking, imagine a patron says to you, "Are you kidding me with this policy? The city's moved away from requiring masks and vaccinations. They're not doing this anywhere else." One thing you could do is share your understanding of what the customer is saying, and really noting that this is frustrating. It sounds like you're upset with our enforcement of the vax and mask policy, especially because it's different from how things are operating elsewhere in the city. Is that right? And after a person confirms you got it right, there are options. A conversation doesn't and most likely won't end at understanding, but it's a critical piece to de-escalate. So simply put, before you share your perspective or what options are available to work with them, make sure that people feel that you get what they're saying, feeling, or needing. And often when you acknowledge someone else's feeling or emotion, however unpleasant they are, you can bring down the tone of the conversation. This is because our feelings are always present, and when they go unacknowledged in conflict, they can become more central, more urgent. So naming another person's feeling or just injecting feeling into your own tone can serve as acknowledgement of that person's experience. It can, in itself, be a way to de-escalate a challenging situation and lead to a more satisfying interaction. Feelings also give us information about what's important to people or what people's underlying needs are. And these vaccination policies touch upon really core human needs that we have around freedom, around civil liberties, around safety. So people will have feelings, and we know this by now. People have feelings about it. And when we can understand the needs of the other, maybe not the way they're going about getting their need met, but if we can understand the underlying need, that's a way to build empathy with others. And we can talk a little bit more about empathy, right? It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's taking a moment to reflect on why they might feel the way they do, why this issue is important to them. Empathizing with someone else verbally can also acknowledge and validate their experience, even if it's different from your own. So to help build empathy with those that challenge you around your institutional policies, I'd encourage you to reflect on a few questions without judgment, right? Why might someone disagree with the vaccination for entry policy? Why might someone not want to wear a mask at an event or wear a mask incorrectly? Why might someone not want their child to wear a mask? And how might someone be impacted if they were denied admission to your institution? So I'd imagine that whether you agree with the responses that you thought of, you can likely relate on some level to why these things might be important to people. And that's what empathy is. It's not agreeing with someone, or it's not agreeing with what they're doing, but it's understanding why they're doing it or why it's meeting a need for them. So another simple and effective tool to use in the moment is asking questions. We all generally prefer to be asked something rather than told. Sometimes it's as simple as rephrasing what you'd usually say as a statement. So if a customer being disrespectful to you, rather than saying you can't speak to me like that, which might be what you want to say, you could say, what is it that you'd like me to know? You could also ask questions to gather information. It can slow down the conversation and give them a chance to respond to you rather than react to whatever that statement would be. So rather than saying this was already shared with you, but really asking, were you aware before you came, of the policies that we had here? Did you receive our email about the policies? Were you able to see the policy written on the ticket? Really inquiring, trying to gather information. And then also present options when you have them. It's important to know what options are available to patrons, what options are available to your staff, whether it's accommodations, whether it's refunds, whether it's supplying masks, whatever it is, when we're given the option to choose, it can, again, build in a pause to the conversation. And a few more tools to keep in your back pocket. One of them is just allowing for silence. Giving someone a space to vent can be important, especially when it's meaningful to them, So if you have to interrupt, have it be to understand, ask someone a question rather than tell someone what to do or why they're wrong. Allowing for silence is also a good place for you to take a moment and focus on your breathing, take a deep breath, like Justo mentioned earlier. And if you do need to interrupt, you can do so with permission. Asking for permission, getting someone to say yes, can also just pause the conversation. So rather than interrupting someone to tell someone about your policy, do you mind if I interrupt? I want to make sure you have accurate information about our space. Also thinking about agreement, where can you find truth in someone else's statement? Doing so can take away resistance. You're not validating a behavior that you disagree with, but you're seeing the truth that you can find in their statement. At minimal, it could be, I agree, this is a real change from how it's been. Or, I agree that this is a more cautious approach than the indoor dining policies at the moment. And also offering explanations. We all like to know the why behind policies that impact us. So after you've listened to them, you can offer your own why. I'd encourage you to think about how to convey your policy and your procedure in a clear and concise manner, whatever that is for you, but to give that some thought and to work with your staff beforehand. And also apologize when appropriate, right? Apologies are a demonstration of empathy to someone else's experience. When it's genuine, it demonstrates humility and that we're all doing our best. Justo, I'll pass to you to disengage.
Thank you, Hallie. Disengage, thinking about ending our conversations, always remembering that we want to disengage well and safely. And ending well means maintaining your composure throughout and keeping in mind that treating others with dignity and respect is the golden rule. Whenever you can, be transparent about the policy and the next steps. Try not to take people's reactions to the policy personally. Maintain, to the best of your ability, positive body language throughout the entire interaction. And remember that people can see us even when we stop talking. And most importantly, as has already been mentioned, if you feel unsafe or in danger, it's about disengaging early. So getting someone to help you, and in escalated situations as needed, calling emergency services. And here is a summary of our 4 steps in SPED, and it's what we've covered so far. We hope that this has been helpful to you. And Hallie is going to share a few more tips on responding well.
Thanks, Justo. So responding, what we mean by that, it just means taking into account the different pieces of the SPED tips, and all these tips can build off of each other. It's not a linear process. And the thought is, how can these be applied in a few different scenarios? And it's really noting the challenges in all of them. But here's some thoughts we had. One thing that might come up as a scenario is people engaging with the public. So like someone is working with a customer or a patron at the door. what could be helpful to focus on. Sometimes it's apologies, listening to understand, asking questions, offering options. So like in my words, which might not be your words, like, I'm sorry that you came all the way down here and you're not able to see the show. Did you receive the email about our vax policy? I realize it's different from other policies at restaurants. And then offering whatever options are available. There's also conversations that we've heard that it's not with the public, but it's really among staff, or it's among people that you have ongoing relationships with. It's not that one-off transaction, but maybe a conflict among backstage crew and cast members about wearing masks. And so here, it's really paying attention to where there's disagreement, offering spaces for people to have private conversations, highlighting the common need that both people will have, and providing resources, providing options. So I might say, if me and Justo were arguing, I can see that you're upset with me right now because I'm enforcing this policy. I'm sorry about that. I also need you to put on a mask so we can continue with the performance tonight. It's something I'd like to continue talking about in private, but it would have to be later. Would you like to do that with me? And then another scenario that we've heard is, what happens, like someone has come in to the event, but there's a disruption during a performance, and it's already escalated. Like maybe you've done the SPED tips already, but there's been more action, and it might be at this point really restating what the policies are. If it's in public, speaking privately, if it's possible, really pulling someone off. Not actually pulling, but like taking someone off to the side and acknowledging, when you're past de-escalation tips and when do you have to move forward with whatever your safety, your safety protocol is. We'd be curious to hear from you. This is a chance, like Shirley mentioned, to use the Q&A function, like what you do or what you say in these interactions or in other interactions that have served you well in responding to conflict. This is just a few things, but there's much more. So we'd encourage if you can use the Q&A function to share your ideas and your best practices. So I haven't seen anything come in. I don't know if anyone else has. But I will, sorry?
Yeah, Hallie, I can start you off with a couple of questions that have come in.
Okay. I was just so this is the end of the formal presentation then. So we'll have a Q&A portion that will be facilitated by you, Shirley. I'm gonna take down the slides. And we'll be joined at the center from Ray Kramer, who's the executive director, and anyone else that's here that might be joining us. You're welcome.
Great. I'll just start, but Jose, feel free to take it from there, right? Okay. So first question is, what do you do if the SPED tips don't work?
So I can start because it's a little bit about what I just said, but if Ray or Justo, you want to add more. I mean, first, if you did all of them, then that's really great. And that means that you did the work of trying to de-escalate, but also knowing like that last piece that Justo mentioned about disengaging well, right? Like if you've gone through the tips, you've tried to center yourself, not be reactionary, tried to listen to understand, offer options, and talk privately if possible, and it's still an escalated event, then it's really knowing when it's past de-escalation, right? Like these are just things to do in the moment, but where can you get help? Where can you enforce whatever policy you need to enforce for compliance? And not continuing to put yourself in danger, that's really not, you know, that won't be helpful for you or for anyone else. I don't know, Ray or Justo, if you want to add anything, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think something that I mentioned earlier is not forgetting what you have been doing already well. So if you were to think about, you know, how you handled disruptions in the past, not related to COVID or mask or anything, but thinking about the steps you took in those situations, relying on those protocols. So if anything, I would say, and what we're emphasizing is where to bring awareness when you're going to engage in any other of the protocols you have in place. So trying to show up in the best way that you can in that moment of engagement, and then being really clear and direct with what it is that you need. If you can do that respectfully and dignity, I think that you can get compliance. And if you can't, then that's when you would have to rely with whatever other protocols you would have in place. Otherwise, it's what I'm thinking.
And I'll just add to that some sort of general thoughts. And thank you, everybody, for inviting us. And Hallie and Justo, thank you. Really appreciate it. I work with two terrific colleagues. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But generally with conflict, and I think we shared this, there's no substitute for kindness or compassion. It's not easy, you know, and then part of that is that centering and self-check that Justo and Hallie talked about. It's about being as authentic as we can be in the situation, because people will detect insincerity and authenticity. So trying to be authentic, you know, we're sharing tips and tools. You'll figure out what works best for you and your authentic self, and then just not getting hijacked by the situation, not internalizing, trying not to personalize it.
So I'm seeing a question from Nicole. Any tips on what to do if you notice the conversation is becoming a debate?
I think if you know, I mean, I'll say something. I think if you know that the conversation is becoming a debate, then you're practicing a lot of self-awareness, which is great. Sometimes we don't know that some things become a debate until it's already over. But I think that's part of where, when we're talking about why this is so challenging, you know, that this really touches, it's very easy to get into a debate around policies, masks. We've all been, you know, probably doing it in one way or the other for the past 2 years. And so it might be like, if you've noticed that it's becoming a debate, like, is that working, right? And if it's not working, which it sounds like it's not, it's really like part of what Justo said at the end, like how does this not become personal, but really just about the policy? And maybe it's just an apology, like, I'm sorry that we see this really differently. And this is the policy, whatever that is, you know, like whatever that statement is that you can say clear and concise, this is what we have at the moment, at this time. And then these are the options that are available. And those options might be limited, but really, like, I think that noticing, Nicole, is awesome. and then it's like, how do you make it about the policy, not about the personal, and then giving whatever options are available.
And I'll just add to that.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
It was just something quickly that came to mind, you know, that we can't all do this alone. So I started to think about staff supporting one another. So I might be in a debate with Hallie, but if I have a colleague that recognizes that, stepping in and taking me away from that situation and just helping me recognize what is it that's happening if I can't in the moment. So that peer support, I think, it's also important, given the context of what's possible in terms of these engagements that we're having either with staff or with the public.
Yeah, thanks, Justo and Hallie. I was just going to share a reminder of a tool that Hallie shared. I think it's very common. It's a very common conflict dynamic that people take positions. I want you to wear the mask. No, I'm not going to wear the mask. And in conflict, we tend to go back and forth to persuade people to adopt our position. And Hallie had shared a tool earlier, listening to understand first, before you're trying to gain compliance or persuade. And including in that listening for understanding is reflecting back what you're hearing, if it seems appropriate and in an authentic way. Because a lot of times people continue to repeat themselves or repeat their positions because on some conscious or unconscious level, they're not feeling like they were heard. So if you find yourself in a back and forth, take a breath and say, well, look, I think I understand, but let me make sure I'm understanding you. This is your concern. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry that I can't do anything different in the moment, but here's where I, need you to work with me. Or do you want a conversation about options? Can you step to the side and I'll come back and we'll talk about any potential options. With that listening to understand and then making sure people know that you heard them by reflecting back will sometimes stop that back and forth.
So I might have just chatted this to everyone that's present, so that a few things also came in from the audience about advice of what they've done, and it might not be completely responsive to the question that was just asked, but I think just in general that one thing that came in from the Staten Island Museum, they said that when we employed these techniques, and maybe this was to what if the techniques don't work, we also offered free family passes for people to return at a later date, and that was well received. We also received advice that just saying thank you for understanding is a really effective phrase, and the customer may not actually understand, but saying that could bring them to a calmer place. We also received advice that's worked for me, I'm not sure who the me is, that treat audience members like 6-year-olds who you don't want to make cry. That means being gentle in your requests and explanations. Don't make them feel bad. And I really like the gentle, that this is really, it's difficult. It's been difficult. I think it will continue to be difficult for frontline staff, and that people that have to have these conversations multiple times a day, but then also for people that really want to come to your institutions and might be upset and be frustrated that they're not able to. How can we be sensitive to that? And then there was one that really echoes, I think, Justo, what you were saying. It's important that individuals know their own personal limitations. If they feel that they're not in control of a situation, it may be better to pass off to a colleague. So where are the places, that you can help and support each other?
So I'm seeing several questions about the role of law enforcement. Folks asking, is there a situation where is it advisable to contact the police? And others asking, if you're past de-escalation, are there any examples of safety plans that don't include the police or other law enforcement?
So those are good questions. I would be curious. When we say follow safety protocol, I think that's really what we mean is what is the safety protocol for each institution? Is it calling 911? Is it engaging with security that you might have at your own institution? I'd imagine that based on what each institution's safety protocol is, it might look a little different. And that also, given the level of escalation, it might look different.
We have a question from...
Yeah.
Go ahead. Did someone else want to jump in there? Okay, we have a question from Weeksville. Even when you listen in dealing with the public, the first thing they say is that the mandate has been lifted. I don't want to have to wear a mask. What advice can you give for this situation?
I mean, in thinking about, SPED, the acronym itself, I think you can engage in the same way that we've been talking about in that situation, and directly stating as best you can or transparently why the policy is in place, and what it is that you need from the person in order to have entry. And if you can't allow them entry, again, there's an opportunity there to share whatever options you have. But at the end of the day, I don't think that the messaging changes, because you need the person to comply to come in. So that's why I'm just thinking, it's really being aware of the situation, being aware of the tone that you're using, thinking about the other person and where they're at. If it's feeling like it's escalating, then we've talked about the disengage and following other steps, but it's still the same similar steps, because I don't think that you're going to compromise folks entering without the requirements that you have in place. I mean, those are my initial thoughts.
Another question we're seeing is, what do you do if you don't have a lot of time?
The answer that comes to mind is that a lot of what we're sharing around happens really quickly, right? I mean, at least as I'm envisioning, people are coming in, and you're asking for what you need. The engagement happens quickly. So, if more time is needed, I think it really depends on what you have available. I understand that each institution will operate differently. So if you need more time and you're working in an institution where you have something planned ahead for conversations that are going to need more time, then that might be an opportunity to invite someone to that. But if you don't, then you go through SPED, and if you are at that place and you're not getting what you need, you're going to have to rely on whatever other protocols you have in place for those situations. Because I'm hearing two things. One, there's what do we do to not escalate things? What do we do to de-escalate when it does rise? But then there's another, it's around compliance for what you need. And I know they kind of work together, but they're really different things. Getting compliance and de-escalation can work together, but they're separate things. And at the end of it, if you are at a place that you're at disengaging because you can't get what you need, I think you're relying on whatever tools or protocols you have or thinking about to require compliance or to remove someone because they're not compliant. And again, doing these things as respectfully, and as you can and politely as you can. Go ahead, Ray. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with what you said, Justo, and just make sure the time pressures are real, because one of the things we say in conflict resolution is because it happens so quickly, people quickly go into fight, flight. One thing that's helpful is to slow things down. But if you really do have time pressures, I think you still go to SPED, and I think it's even more important not to get nervous and rush yourself. You still stay calm, even if you might be a little more pointed, because the energy that and the nonverbals that you demonstrate, as Hallie shared, can impact. So if you're feeling anxious, rushed, nervous, and sort of rushing, then that'll get mirrored. Whereas if you're able to stay calm and in control, keep your tone, kind, and just get a little more pointed, if you really do have time pressures. And then, to Justo's point, if you're not getting compliance quickly enough and you have those time pressures, go to the compliance protocols or whatever support you may have.
There's a question from someone who's asking if we can just restate the steps for SPED. What is the acronym SPED? We have a question. If you're trying to de-escalate a situation where you're stuck in a very small physical space, how can you get the aggressor to back off physically?
What came up is I don't know, because that sounds like a situation where it's already escalating. It sounds like there's a physical threat. And I don't know that you want to try to remove someone physically. So thinking about that space, how do you have it in a way where you can access support quickly, or not use that tight space to engage with customers? I mean, a lot of this is around prevention. So if you're starting to think that there might be a space that is not helpful either to have access to safety or enough physical space, and maybe is reconsidering where you are having these conversations. But you work with what you can, being aware and being attuned, trusting your gut, common sense, stepping away as best you can, doing what you can to be safe is what comes to mind.
Yeah, and I could just add to that. I think, yes, safety is a priority. Sometimes people in that, fight, flight reaction don't realize they're moving closer to you, don't realize their voice is as raised or as loud. So you may be able to state what you need. For example, sir or ma'am, I want to understand. I want to hear you out, but I need you just to lower your voice a little bit, or I need you just to step back a little bit, and let's continue the conversation. But you may be able to name that need, because if it's unconscious, then people will suddenly realize, okay, I'm yelling, or I'm too close, or I hear what you need.
We've had a request to share the poster that's been created. Can we get that up on the screen share for folks to be able to see that? So there's a link to this poster in the chat. We will put that back in. It was placed earlier in the meeting.
Just want to be sensitive to everyone's time. Since we started a few minutes late, maybe we can have, maybe we have time for one more question and then we can wrap.
I'm seeing a question. How do you deal with guests who say they don't believe in COVID and it is made up, which this venue has unfortunately and surprisingly dealt with often?
Yeah, this reminds me of what someone said earlier about like getting into a debate. It even just hearing it sounds like it could very easily turn into a debate that we've all had at this point. And my thought would be, and it might be similar before, but how do you not do that? Like, and really it might be difficult to not do that, but to do that listening, like I understand that's how you feel COVID is, and that this is an overreaction on our part. And I hear that. And at the same time, this is the policy that our institution is enforcing right now. And the options that we have are this, but that's really what we have at the moment. And it's not going towards that debate, but really listening to them, and also restating your policy, and then what options are available. if that's the last question, Shirley, I just wanted to, thank everyone that these are really difficult conversations and positions to be in. And I think that if anything, we hope that there's more conversations about how you can support each other within your knowing the difficulty, knowing that everyone has been having these conversations with varying levels of success over the past 2 years. So where you can support each other, your staff, to be able to continue the work that you're doing. So thank you.
I just want to say thank you as well. I thought this was a very informative discussion today. I thank all of the panelists, everybody that asked questions. These are techniques that we can all use in all walks of life. I'm going to try some of them at home on my 4-year-old today. I mean, you can utilize those breathing techniques, so simple. It's something that we take for granted, but just the recentering is so critical, and really, utilizing these as best as we can. It may seem, I thought the debate question was really interesting, so that, we're not engaging in debates, but I also think it's important to also know who you're speaking to as well. And as much as you can relate to that person, I've always found as an elected official has always been so helpful in terms of, if you see the person's a mom, if you see the person is elderly, all the different types of things or commonalities, the quicker you can find a commonality, I find has always been helpful, because once they can see themselves in you and you in them, whether that's how they dress, where did they come from, if they traveled far, if they have a cane, if they have all of these different things, as much as you can relate to someone. I've often found that, if I see someone that they remind me of my mom or my grandmother, those things have always helped in terms of being able to relate and talk to someone, and to get them to see the humanity in you as you see the humanity in them as well. So I thank you all. This was great. Let's try to work these techniques out at home, in the office place, in dealing and working with audiences, with our colleagues, and hopefully we'll continue this discussion, because these are techniques that we can utilize and we constantly need reminders for. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And just to quickly wrap, I want to just acknowledge that there were a couple of questions that still we weren't able to answer in the short time that we had together. So when we circulate a link to the presentation and send a link out with the image of the downloadable signage that you can use, we'll also do our best to acknowledge some of the questions that were asked today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.